Thanks so much for coming tonight. Now I'm going to hand it off to Laura Dene of Flickr Filmworks and the director of Stop Danskammer.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see so many lovely smiling faces out there. And even those of you who don't have your, oops, sorry, 1 second. I'm having my own technical problem over here while I speak. Even those of you who don't have your video on, that's great. I'm Laura Dene of Flickr Filmworks. I want to thank Jess so much for organizing this event. It's amazing. To Jesse and Angel at Hudzy TV, as well as my partners Mustafa, who volunteered their time to do the filming. And thank you so much to our incredible panel of speakers. Some of them you'll recognize from the film in a couple minutes. And thank you so much for coming out tonight to speak with us and answer our questions. I'm not going to say too much about the film. I'll let it speak for itself, but its purpose is twofold. One is just to provide a tool to help the amazing community effort to stop the fracked gas plant called Danskammer in Newburgh, New York. The other is to put an end to the idea that environmentalism can be separated from racial justice. As so many of us are becoming more and more painfully aware every day, racism permeates every aspect of our society, from housing to education, from criminal justice to, of course, the environment. There's still so much to be done and learned, and our hope is that our conversation today will be one small step in the long journey to a more equitable world. The film's only 3.5 minutes, a length that's meant to be shared online, so please forward away. I'm going to go ahead and play the film by screen sharing now, but if you have any problems with stuttering or it being out of sync, Jess is going to put the link to the YouTube site, which is just being released today, into the chat. So feel free to just go watch it on your own, and then we could all meet back up here in 4 minutes. So I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you so much for coming.
It's all about the money. What about our lives? What about the next generations?
If anyone wants to help with that, we can get that organized.
Right now, we're getting ready to start a protest against Danskammer.
Danskammer is an existing power plant on the Hudson River. It's been around since the 1950s. It runs 2 or 3% of the time at most. And the owner of the plant has proposed to build a new gas-fired power plant immediately next to the old one. Would run nearly all the time. You're going to see greenhouse gas emissions rise 40-fold above what the current plant emits. So the local communities are really going to see an increase in air pollution if this new plant is allowed to go forward.
Stop Danskammer now.
We do not want that kind of legacy for our community members, for our children.
They pollute our water, they pollute our air, and that's the reason why our people are dying.
Newburgh in general has about 5 times the national rate of asthma, and still does have one of the highest rates in Orange County of COVID-19.
COVID attacks your respiratory system, so bringing this plant on board is not going to be a great idea.
Environmental racism has been a really big factor here in the city of Newburgh. With 80% of its demographic being considered a minority, it's often one of the cities that's most picked on when it comes to building these sort of facilities.
Our water has been compromised. Now our air is being compromised.
And the people that will suffer are brown and black folks.
Historically, power plants, garbage dumps, water treatment centers, they've all been located in low-income areas and communities of color.
It's not unique here in New York. It's not unique here in the United States.
They feel like this is a community that isn't really going to speak up. It's about time that they start listening to the people that are going to be affected by this.
Stop Danskammer!
This exploitation of the most vulnerable is a statement not about the vulnerable. We really should look at who's exploiting.
No justice! No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
And what created the mind that allows that to be okay? Because they know better. They would not put that factory in their neighborhood.
Sean Patrick Maloney, don't be a climate pony.
The Danskammer project is a 20th century project. It's a project that looks backwards to the old way of doing things. If we're going to overcome the climate crisis, if we're going to have healthy, sustainable communities into the future, we need to be looking forward. We need to be looking at the goals of that Climate Act, and we need to be investing in clean, sustainable energy solutions. Danskammer is not a part of that future.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. And we're so lucky to have some of the people featured in the film here tonight. So please go ahead and start putting up your questions for any of our panelists. But first, we'll do an introduction. So you could also wait a minute for that. Let's see. So there's a link where this is amazing. There's actually a new petition out today. And there's a link that Jess will put up that has the petition so that you can go ahead and sign that right now. We'll put it up there again at the end so that you can sign and share that. And so we're going to start with an introduction of each member of our panel. And you can just say, please, who you are, what you do, and your involvement with Danskammer and or racial and environmental justice. And we, unfortunately, Glenn Singleton of Courageous Conversations couldn't come tonight. He was called in for an emergency, but his wonderful coworker, David, is here. So David, would you mind unmuting yourself and introducing yourself? Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, thank you. I'm David Gonzalez. I'm the program manager of certification at Courageous Conversation. And I'm calling this evening from Austin, Texas. At Courageous Conversation, we're an organization that's committed to achieving racial equity. We engage in sustained partnerships to transform beliefs, behaviors, and results so all races can achieve at their highest levels and live their most empowered and powerful lives. Thanks for letting me be on the call tonight.
And we have Anthony Grice here tonight. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, so thank you and thank everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Anthony Grice. I'm an elected official for the city of Newburgh. I'm councilman at large, which means I represent the whole city. Then I'm also on the Quasade Creek Watershed Alliance. I'm a supporter of Newburgh Clean Water Project and a supporter of Riverkeeper. And I'm also on the Air National Guard Restoration Advisory Committee, which is dealing with the PFAS in our water in Washington Lake.
Hi everyone, my name is Aura Lopez Arate. Thank you for having me here tonight, and thank you for everyone for coming and attending this event as well. I'm a City of Newburgh resident. I'm also a community organizer for Planned Parenthood of Greater New York, and I'm also involved in other efforts here in the city, including the SUA Air National Guard Restoration Advisory Committee as well. And thank you for having me tonight.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Sanchez Potter. I'm a City of Newburgh resident, and I've been involved with the Stop Danskammer Coalition and the greater movement for environmental justice in Newburgh for some time now. I also work closely with Newburgh Clean Water Project, and I'm currently serving on the RAC as well. So thank you for having me.
Hello, my name is Renee. I am also a resident here in the City of Newburgh, and I am currently a community organizer with Nobody Leaves Mid-Hudson. And our role has been trying to organize alongside people at Food and Water Watch and many other organizations here in the Hudson Valley opposing Danskammer.
Hi, my name is Haley Carlock. I'm the Director of Advocacy for Scenic Hudson. And I've been working to stop the Danskammer plant for the past 2.5 years or so, helping to form the Stop Danskammer Coalition, the Stop the Plant website and campaign. You can check out stoptheplant.org, as well as wearing my lawyer hat and intervening in the permitting process for the plant before the New York State Siting Board.
Hi, I am Tamsin Hollow, also Newburgh, City of Newburgh resident. I'm with Newburgh Clean Water Project. We're working to protect our water, air, and soil from an environmental justice perspective. And I'm also very proud to be part of the Stop Danskammer Coalition. And I hope all of you will be too.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Kevin Darian Lujan. I'm an Orange County legislator representing District 4 here in Orange County, and I am a proud supporter of all the different work that you've heard so far tonight, and I look forward to working with everyone here. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, everyone. David, a question for you. Could you please define environmental justice for us and explain why it's important for the environmental movement to always put race at the front of the conversation?
Thanks, Daria. Good question. To define environmental justice, we must think about fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, origin, socioeconomics, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of our environmental laws, regulations, and policies that exist. We know the goal of environmental justice will be achieved when all peoples have the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards, and there's equal access to a decision-making process to have a healthy environment in which all of us can live, learn, and work. And so understanding this definition of environmental justice, we then must also put race at the front of the conversation as well. At Courageous Conversation, we believe that race is always at play. Some people say, well, we want to play the race card, and we don't believe race is a card to be played. Race is impacting our society 100% of the time, whether it's in education, the corporate setting, government, healthcare, and so on. So due to this, we must be conscious of race within any movement or organization. And when we're conscious, we're then better equipped to examine and address racial disparities that may exist. So within the environmental movement, if we seek to attain the goals of truly attaining racial or environmental justice, we must be conscious of who's being exploited and by means of where. Thus, we have to ask ourselves the question, are all peoples being afforded the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards? And if the answer to questions like this is no, then we must ask who is not being afforded this and why.
Thank you so much, David. A question for Anthony next. Some people with us tonight might not have been to Newburgh. Can you tell us about your city and about some of the issues you're up against right now?
Sure. So I'll be really brief about, our city, because a lot of that can be, of course, Google search. And then I'm always reluctant to say anything negative about the city of Newburgh, because certainly enough of that is done in the media. So, but really quickly, we're 60 miles north of New York City. We're about 4 square miles, 30,000 people. A large Latino population is about 50%, 30% African-American, and then the rest are white or other. And so it's important that when we're doing communications, that we're doing it in our 3 major languages of English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. One of the things, and I think it was mentioned earlier, we have the highest asthma rate here in Orange County and in New York State. So that's problematic, when we're talking about something like Danskammer. Another thing that's problematic here in the city of Newburgh is that our average median income is around 35,000. So that really, you know, when you compare it to the rest of the county, and they're making like twice as much. So that could be problematic, you know, when we're talking about equity and those other things. Two of the issues that are problematic, because I saw it in one of the questions, we actually do that plant, Danskammer, wouldn't actually be in the city of Newburgh. Because even if they tried, we would stop them at the door, but it is actually in a neighboring municipality. However, we are going to feel those impacts. And then just really quickly, because these things aren't in isolation, you know, when we're talking about environmental justice, these things certainly impact all of those other things. And so our water, our main source of drinking water was contaminated, but it's the same situation. Our main source of drinking water isn't within our city limits. So certainly those are some of the things that we are up against, besides the steady trickle of gentrification that's happening in our community, besides some of the other things, the overprevalence of drugs, the overprevalence of guns, and those other things. So there's a lot of things to handle, and I certainly see them as an umbrella. They're not mutually exclusive one of the others. And so that is the city of Newburgh in a nutshell. At the same time, because I want to end it on a positive, we have a lot of organizations, though, that are really doing a yeoman's job in improving the city of Newburgh. So some of them I didn't mention when I was saying what I was a part of, but we have people like We Are Newburgh, Melanin Unchained, Keep Newburgh Beautiful, and I'm sorry if I missed any of those other organizations that are really just doing tremendous work on improving the city of Newburgh. And so that, if anything, that's the thing that I want people to lead with.
Wonderful, thank you. And Newburgh is a beautiful city with a wonderful community, so thank you, Anthony. Next question is for Mark. Mark, would you be able to tell us how did Newburgh's water become polluted, and is it being remediated? And are there any updates for us?
Yes, so a brief overview. The drinking water that the city of Newburgh was using up until 2016 was Washington Lake, and located close to that is the Stewart Air National Guard Base. In the 1990s, and really for the last 50 years, firefighting foam that contains PFAS and PFOA was used at that Air Force base. So whenever there was an accident or whenever there was training, they would discharge this foam. It would get into the ground, it would get into various streams, and ultimately it ended up getting into the drinking water for the city of Newburgh, which was Lake Washington. In 2016, the state lowered the levels of the acceptable amount of PFAS and PFOA to where it became a crisis, and the city manager at that time declared a state of emergency, and the water was changed. So since then, we have not been using the drinking water from Lake Washington. We've been using the New York Aqueduct, or we've been using Brown's Pond. But recently, Newburgh Clean Water Project filed a lawsuit challenging new rulings against the EPA. So Newburgh Clean Water Project, NAACP, and a host of other environmental justice groups are currently engaged in litigation against the Environmental Protection Agency for weakening regulations for drinking water. Hopefully, we will see some positives out of that, but also currently there is the Restoration Advisory Committee that is working with the Air National Guard in an attempt to clean up the water and ensure equitable cleaning and a transition to clean drinking water for the city of Newburgh going forward.
Great. We did have a question from someone in the audience. Why is the air quality so poor in Newburgh? Would anyone like to field that question for us?
I can. So for the city of Newburgh, we're actually in the Hudson Valley, and it is just that, it's a valley. And so what happens is we're in climate zone, and forgive me if I get it wrong, but we're in climate zone, I think 5 or something like that. And so, because I saw that as one of the other questions, and so that's why stopping Danskammer is so important, because they are right in that question. The winds do come down here to the city of Newburgh. And so that's what's happening. Also, we're 60 miles from New York City, so those winds sometimes come up and across us. So it's just one of those vortex type situations, if you will, that really just kind of traps some of that bad air with us.
Great, thank you. I think that answers that person's question. Let us know if you still have more to ask about that. Kevin Darian, could we ask you a question? Could you tell us about the need for diverse voices in activism?
Absolutely, and I think that the city of Newburgh is such a unique, you know, when you look in a unique example when we want to look at activism and the right ways, in fact, of how to do that. If you look at, you know, some of the members on this panel, every single one of them, you know, is passionate about so many different issues. But the great thing is that you'll see some of these same faces at some of the same at different rallies, and it's because they understand the importance of supporting one another. The issue of women's rights or women's health is great, just very much connected to environmental justice. If we're talking about immigrants' rights, it's also connected to environmental justice, and so on. And so it's very important that we recognize that in Newburgh we have this unique microcosm of what diversity in activism really looks like. So I wanted to start there. But when we look at activism, and this is really, you know, a national and an international problem, is that oftentimes when we think of activism, when we look at our boards, oftentimes the people that are supposed to be represented are oftentimes not on those boards. And that's a really big challenge. In the last year, you know, we've seen protests all across the country in all 50 states. And while we talk about, you know, Black Lives Matter, and we talk about, you know, that racial equity and justice, we need to also talk about those boards, and we need to talk about those movements and what they look like. And so if you're looking at a board that is 80% or 90% or 100% all white and older, then you have a problem in your board. You have a problem in your movement. And that is one of the things I think it's so important, so pivotal for us to be talking about, the unsustainable whiteness of movements. It is, the Sierra Club talked about it in 2017. It still exists as a problem on all activist movements, not just environmental movements. And so when we're trying to recruit, we have to do exactly what's been done here in Newburgh with groups like Food and Water Watch, the Newburgh Clean Water Project. Those are the groups and many others, River Keeper and so on, who understand the importance of having diverse voices that recruit from the community. Because ultimately, if we want to make sure that there is real justice and real equity, that we're informing our community, it's going to come from individuals that look like us. That buy-in is going to come from ambassadors like Mark and like Auda and like Renee and like Mr. Grice and Tamsin and others who speak about the issues, who care about those issues deeply because it's about their community. It doesn't get more personal than home, ladies and gentlemen. So when you're trying to recruit in movements, you need to look within your community. Your community should look like you. It should look like the brown and brown faces that are here. It should look like young voices that are screaming to be heard, because oftentimes they're told that they're too bold or too ambitious or too naive to ask for changes. That is what real movements look like. They look like diversity, real diversity. And so I challenge anyone here who represents or is a president of a board that is pushing for a movement, make sure that real diversity includes those voices. You must meet people where they are, and you must go out of your way to find them. It is not their responsibility to find you. It is your responsibility to find them. And so if we truly want to have strong movements, strong activist movements that are fighting for the issues that we all care about, whether it's the environment, whether it's women's issues or what have you, we need to go out of our way to be intentional about our anti-racism, intentional about our willingness and our desire to be diverse. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Aura, and I'm gonna ask Renee a follow-up question on this too. could you talk about what are some of the ways that the people of Newburgh are fighting back against environmental racism?
Yeah, of course. I think many of them were already mentioned here, but for sure, just the organizations, right, who are organizing folks in the ground. Example, the protest that was shown in the film that Food and Water Watch organized. You know, showing up to spaces like that really matter, and that is one of the ways that Newburgh fights back. They show up when they need to. Also, other organizations working in coalition, I've noticed that that is like a really big thing here in Newburgh. That has worked for like different kind of issues, whether that's like immigration or like even police brutality or like showing up to city council meetings. That's also something that has worked working in coalition. I also do want to bring up just because like some folks here also sit on the rec committee. I think that's another example. The organizations that are kind of leading the environmental movement here in our city are kind of like really good at reaching out to community members who are impacted by these issues, and they make sure that we are holding folks accountable for either like cleaning up our water, and now like with Danskammer, folks like Mark and other organizations are, I feel like, kind of like really impactful and good at organizing folks. So those are some ways that people are fighting back.
Great. And Renee, if you have anything to add to that, that'd be great. And we were curious if there's any ways that immigrants in particular are affected by Danskammer or other environmental justice issues.
Yes, immigrants, like in any community where it's primarily made up of folks who are in the minority, are affected by this because one, it's altering the conditions in which the people are living, and two, these are folks who do not have the means to be able to take care of themselves once, you know, they've been subjected to, you know, an increase in, you know, water contamination, in more pollution in the air. You know, sometimes they look at this and they think, oh, that might be a bit of asthma that people will get, but they don't look at the roots. You know, how much does an inhaler cost? How much will an appointment to go see a doctor cost? How many visits will they have to go and see a doctor? And sadly, we live in a state right now where there is no easy way to get health insurance if you are undocumented. So thus, we are now putting another expense on top of what is already, you know, a very, you know, hard life to live as an immigrant here in Newburgh when we allow things like this to continue. And not just that, but also the children then. Because when we look at how some of these jobs go, they may hire the person who would be the cheapest in labor, and oftentimes that just happens to be an immigrant, because an immigrant doesn't really have the luxury of saying no to a job. And so now these younger children growing up seeing their parents take these jobs will think that this is a good place to go and work in the future. And when more projects like this come, they'll know that they'll have a larger pool of people to pull from. So, you know, these large factories aren't just, you know, creating health issues, but then social economic issues as well. More disparity in our community, especially, you know, in these immigrant communities where they don't have an out to it or an easier way to go and find another sort of job. So those are some of the issues that the immigrant community is facing.
Thank you so much, Renee. A couple of questions, a few questions have come in from the viewing audience out there. Let's see, Haley, a question for you. Who owns the plant and why do they get an exception from New York's anti-fracking law?
Sure, the plant is owned by a company called Danskammer LLC, which is really just a single purpose company with a couple of employees, specifically created to build this plant, there is a private equity firm called Tiger Infrastructure, which is providing all of the funds for the project. They don't get an exception to New York's anti-fracking law. New York has a ban on the act of hydraulic fracturing itself. Unfortunately, not a ban on the use of gas that comes from fracking in other states like Pennsylvania and like Ohio. And to be fair, I'll say that while there is clearly a policy dissonance there with kind of using the gas that comes from this dangerous and unhealthy method, New York only has so many options at its disposal to stop that gas at the border. There would be sort of a lot of legal issues and challenges if they tried to prevent interstate pipelines from transporting gas. But given New York's clear stance against fracking and against the use of fracked fuel, and even more what Governor Cuomo said in a speech last week, which was that New York State must shut all its power plants, all its fossil fuel power plants, no ifs, ands, or buts. I think that clearly we're a state that's headed in the direction away from using fossil fuels, away from using fracked gas, and that's where we should be going.
Thank you. Great. It's a great answer. Sorry, 1 second. I'm just looking for the other questions that came in. Okay, so this is an interesting question. What is the likelihood of revisioning the site for solar battery storage? Would anyone be able to take that question?
I hate to answer two questions in a row. I like to give other people a chance to speak, but I think I have to answer this one. Scenic Hudson recently hosted an event in December, just before the holidays, unveiling a concept that we developed with an energy finance professional and a team of landscape design and industrial design folks from the University of Pennsylvania School of Design that did just that, that had a combination battery storage, potentially with some solar on the site. And we proposed that as a better, more sustainable use for the site that can also bring some of the economic benefits that some people in the town of Newburgh in particular are looking for out of the Danskammer plant proposal. It's our hope that Danskammer sees the writing on their wall, that their plant is really inconsistent with New York State's climate policy, that it is incredibly unpopular with the people who live and work in Orange County and throughout the Hudson Valley, and that they see the battery storage as a better alternative. But they own the site, as we just talked about. So really the ball is in their court to make a better choice at this point.
Thank you. The next question is, what are the opportunities to impact the decision-making processes? Do the citizen groups represented here have access to these processes, and what's the timeline? Can anyone speak to that for us?
Perhaps me and Haley can field this one, if you'd like, Haley.
Sure.
I'll
sure,
just
go first, Mark.
Yeah, I'll talk about the impact we can have, and then you could do the timeline. Okay. Absolutely, we can impact the decision making. Ultimately, and whenever we canvass or whenever we engage with the community, we make it very clear. The one person in New York State that can stop this project right now, today, this hour, is Governor Cuomo. So whenever we do an action or whenever we pass a resolution or work with different communities, we make it known that Governor Cuomo holds the ultimate power. There is the Public Siting Board, who we also target, but we make it known that people do have power. When you pass municipal resolutions, when you collect signatures, when you call the governor's office, this is all going into a log. It's going into a docket. And when this gets presented to the Public Service Commission, they have to review all of these documents. So if there are 11,000 signatures against Danskammer, those are all noted. If there are, we're up to almost 30 municipalities with resolutions against it, all of those have to be entered to that docket. So people power is really what is going to stop Danskammer, because they have to take into consideration all of the opposition that's going on. And when the opposition is more than, you know, the people that are for it, there's no way that they can win, basically. And I'm going to pass it over to Haley.
Yeah, so just a little bit more on the timeline and process. And I guess I should say, I think it's implicit in a lot of the comments we've been making, but for folks who may not know this, pretty much exclusive jurisdiction to permit this plant to build and operate lies with New York State. There's no local permitting, there's no local seeker process, there's no really substantive federal permit. So this is a New York State decision-making process. And we're very much at the beginning of that process, even though for those who have been paying attention, we've been talking about Danskammer for a long time. The official permitting process hasn't even begun yet. Danskammer's application has been rejected a number of times for insufficient information on how it could possibly be compliant with the state's climate policy. And we're currently awaiting a decision from the siting board on that. But once the siting board decides that the application is complete, that starts the running of a 12-month clock for a decision to be made. And that's when the rubber will really hit the road, and there'll be, you know, a whole trial type proceeding, a number of opportunities for official public comments, like Mark said, on the record, on the Public Service Commission site, and there'll also be public statement hearings.
Great. Does anyone have anything to add to any of the questions that have been asked so far? Okay, great. Let's move on to the next question. Actually, Kevin, Darian, can we go back and talk about some of the ways to that we can reach some of the populations, some of the various immigration populations in Newburgh? Do you have any thoughts about that, about this and other environmental justice issues?
Sure, absolutely. Councilman Grice actually highlighted, I think, very nicely to you know, we have here, for example, 3 main languages: English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. And one of the things that you'll notice, you know, from the activist movement here is that, and I said this, you know, about the importance of diverse voices, is we've had Latin speakers going door to door and talking with people. We've had people who speak, you know, Haitian Creole or French to speak with our Haitian community. And so that's what it really takes. It takes making sure that you're going into those communities, knocking on doors, having those conversations. You know, one of the things that we've noticed with COVID is how easily it is for people to not have the important information that they need. And I say this for a really big reason. You know, in Orange County, for instance, early on, when we were trying to talk about the importance of mask wearing, when we talked about the importance of social distancing, there was an immense gap about what was being told and being said and how and where it was being distributed. And I can tell you, is specifically communities like the city of Newburgh, with a very large Latin population, with a Spanish-speaking population, with a large, you know, Haitian Creole population, that did not get that information, and were also therefore put more at risk. The same can be said about environmental justice and any environmental movement or any activist movement, is that if the community is not aware of those issues, if they're not familiar about the health risks, then obviously they can't be a part of the change and a part of the solutions. And it's so important that we educate our community, and that takes all of us, right? So going door to door, making sure that we have pamphlets that are in different languages, so we make sure that we're getting that information out there. I think it's really, really critical. You know, with PFAS, I was talking, you know, the other day about how they don't want to be able to, the National Guard doesn't want to put information in Spanish. That is disastrous. How can we possibly think that we're going to do outreach and we're not going to do it in Spanish? You know, that is so tone deaf. And so it's so important that if we're going to really reach out to our community, that we at least know our community. And it starts by making sure that we're translating flyers and posters and information so that our community is aware. And so if we're not doing that, we've already failed our community. And I think that the great thing is that here you have great activists that are doing that, you know, and leaders who are committed to making sure that we're getting that information out in diverse languages. And so I credit that to all the activists that are here, and Councilman Grice and others who have been so pivotal in that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Glad to hear. I'm glad to hear that's happening. Tamsin, could we ask you a question? How can people get involved to stop Danskammer?
Great question, and I'm so happy to answer it. There are lots of ways to get involved and to help City of Newburgh and your own community be represented. One thing that we haven't really talked about is that something that our water situation and the Danskammer situation have in common is that here in the City of Newburgh, we don't own the land that these two problems, toxic problems, exist on, and yet we have to absorb all the ill effects of them. So by going to stoptheplant.org and signing the petition, and I have the link there in the chat, you're helping us amplify our voice, that the air might not be on our property, but we're breathing it. You're breathing it in Beacon. You're breathing it up and down throughout the Hudson, and we all should have a say in that. For email updates about upcoming actions, go again on stoptheplant.org. There is a Take Action tab. Hit that. You can make a comment to the siting board. You can talk about where you live in the Hudson Valley or in New York, or if you want to make a comment about the use of fracked gas and you live in Pennsylvania, go ahead. You can make a comment to the siting board. If you're a business, particularly if you're a business in the Hudson Valley, go ahead and sign on to our business sign-on letter. Creating a dirty, polluted Hudson Valley is no good for business. It's no good for our reputation as one of the most beautiful areas on earth. So go and check that out. Again, you can check that out on stoptheplant.org and sign on. I think most importantly, and Mark mentioned this earlier, that word of mouth is so important. Tell your family, tell your friends, tell your community. We have people up and down the Hudson Valley who have started their own events to oppose this and to get the word out. You can also check us out on Facebook if anyone's still on Facebook. There's a great way to check out events that are coming up. Obviously, a lot of these events are not in person, but once in a while you might find a few of us out on the streets. And thank you for all that you do, and thanks for all the great questions. And I hope that some of those pages will be able to answer some of the specifics of the questions that you've been asking.
Fantastic, thanks so much. We've had a few more questions come in. To what extent is the cultural significance of the site being considered? What efforts have been made to include local Indigenous voices in the coalition? Would anyone like to answer that? It's a tricky one.
I can answer it a little bit. We have been reaching out to Lenape tribal leaders. It is a very important cultural site. I think, I don't know if you guys know this, but the reason it was called Danskammer is because the Dutch floating up the Hudson River saw people dancing by firelight on that site. So it was a sacred site, and in our eyes it continues to be. And we are certainly consulting tribal leaders regarding that site to preserve it and respect it for the sacred site that it is.
Fantastic, so important. There's one question. I'm really impressed with Courageous Conversation Representative David Gonzalez. I'm wondering how is Courageous Conversations involved in helping Newburgh with this issue? And I'll tell you that directly, this is the way that I was lucky enough to be working with Glenn Singleton on a different film with my partner at Flickr Filmworks, who is amazing. So we asked him to comment a little bit more broadly about these kind of situations. But David, would you be able to talk about a little bit more about, is this kind of situation common? Do you see other types of environmental justice situations in your work?
Yeah, that's a good question, Laura. And I would say from my role specifically, I don't have a lot of reach out with environmental justice work. By running the certification program, I do a lot of work with systemic partners, and so often it's the sectors of education, corporate world that I work with. That being said, the conversation, what we train our people in doing is having conversations of how is race being played out in this given scenario. And so you take that scenario, and Danskammer being the topic for this evening of, is race at play? And if so, what must we do to examine and address any disparities that are existing as a result of this? And so that's what we do. That's what we look at, and because we feel it's a factor that's always in play.
Thank you. That's so helpful. There's one question that I think we might need a little bit of an explanation along with the answer. How will we be able to access the information on what and when to respond after the 12-month clock begins?
Sure. Well,
so
I'll give you
Haley,
an easy answer, and that is to sign up for updates on the stoptheplant.org site, simply because we'll inform you then by email of all those opportunities, when's the time to weigh in, how you can comment, how you can show up and make your voice heard. But if you don't want to give your email address, if you check into the stoptheplant.org site, or probably any of the organizations participating here today, I know certainly Scenic Hudson, and I'm sure many others are going to keep those updates up on their websites as well as Facebook pages and other social media. So just keep informed, sign up for those updates, and we will let you know when those times are when you can weigh in on the official record.
Thank you. I'll ask one more, and then we have a couple more questions. What coordination, collaboration, if any, is taking place with other communities across the country facing the same issues? Also, how are the schools and the youth being engaged?
I'd like to just touch on that just really briefly, more on a local level. You know, one of the great things about activist movements and what we're seeing, you know, whether you're talking about immigrants' rights and the Green Light movement, or you're talking about banning plastic bags, or whether you're talking about things like Danskammer, a lot of the movements, they're starting more and more at the local level, and that's so important. When we talk about people power, it doesn't get more critical than that. And Mark mentioned earlier in his comments about how, you know, getting municipal laws passed against Danskammer. So this is something that happened, over the last 2 years. We started seeing a few communities. Now we see more and more communities saying that they're against it. Now it's going to county legislators, across the Hudson Valley, pushing this as well. Rallying against, rallying for state officials to come out against it as well. This is what it takes: that local level and going all the way up of the state up to the federal government, and creating those coalitions. And a lot of that is very much youth driven. And that's the really great thing about the model that started here in Newburgh. And it is very, very youth driven, but it's not just youth driven. It's a beautiful coalition of so many diverse voices. And so that's what, when we talk about diversity, once again, it's going to take every one of those voices. It's going to take, community members from the communities that are going to be impacted, and who are going to be able to talk about the impact that it's going to have on their communities. And so this isn't just going to impact Newburgh. It's going to impact all of our neighbors. It's going to impact, Beacon just as much as it's going to impact us. And so when we fight together and are united on this, I think that's the voice that people are going to see, is that united voice of all these municipalities that are saying, we never want to see Danskammer in our backyard.
Yes, absolutely. To add to the question, how this is related to some other issues. As we all know, Danskammer is being funded by a Wall Street firm, as Haley pointed out. So you have big money pushing this. You have all of these projects going up in the Hudson Valley, as well as throughout the country, because Wall Street wants them. Going back several years, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, put out incentives in order for these large pollution machines to be built. So it's a money game for Wall Street. It doesn't meet our energy needs. We don't need it. There's been independent studies that have said that Danskammer is not needed. So it all boils back to Wall Street and how we're seeing some youth involved. So perhaps the biggest way that a lot of the youth have been involved is whenever we were passing a resolution, whether it was in Newburgh, there were young people involved, as well as people of color, but it was always young people. It was young adults. It was kids that were involved in this. We're possibly getting a resolution from the County of Westchester sometime soon, and that was led by Sunrise Westchester, which is a bunch of high school students in Westchester. So there are a lot of young people that were inspired by people like Greta Thunberg and so many others to get involved into the environmental justice movement. So you're really starting to see young people say, it's my future, I have a right to live, and I'm going to be engaged in this resistance to, the blatant rape of our earth from capitalism. So, so it's definitely a youth-led movement, and it's a multiracial, multi-generational, mosaic of humanity. So.
Great. So does anyone know of any success stories when an environmental justice community has defeated proposed projects like this? And if there's any of the panelists or even anyone in the audience who might have some examples, that would be great to inspire us.
Well, last year we stopped the Williams pipeline. So that was our big, and for those that didn't know, there was a proposed pipeline that would go through New York Harbor to the Rockaways in New York City. And, it took massive resistance and organizing, again, by communities of color, indigenous folk, people that lived on the ocean to say, we don't want this. And ultimately, Governor Cuomo last spring said no. So, I mean, the Williams pipeline has been permanently defeated. So that's one way that communities have organized to stop environmental injustice, definitely.
Any other examples, and sort of what could be a model or what could be a way forward to getting Danskammer defeated similarly?
I see someone said Pilgrim Pipeline, which I actually helped with, was stopped because of strong grassroots pressure. This is also kind of a segue into the importance of petitioning and our brand new petition launch, which I can put in the chat. Yeah, something that everyone can do right here, right now, stop Danskammer and support Newburgh and the Hudson Valley, is to take a moment and sign our brand new petition to Governor Cuomo. Other fossil fuel projects in environmental justice communities have been defeated, and petitioning is a crucial tool to reach elected officials. So please sign that petition and share it as much as you can. And if you have any questions or would like to learn more about specific ways that you can plug into our campaign, you can email me. I'll put my email in the chat and I'll give it back to Laura.
Thank you. Yeah, can't believe it's already almost 7 o'clock. Really quickly, do any of the panelists have one thing that they really want to say before we wrap up here? Okay, good. I think we covered so much ground today. I'm so grateful you all coming.
One more.
Okay, Mark.
Sorry.
Yes.
So when I was learning about organizing and when I was learning about how we're going to stop Danskammer, one of the slogans that a lot of organizers would say is, they have money, but we have people power. So I think that that's really a beautiful thing. So, they have money, but we have people power. And so when you have people power, it's a wonderful thing, and you will win. So.
I also want to say, Laura, thank you so much for giving us this amazing tool to pass on in our communities, because I think the beautiful film that you've made really tells our story well. And I really encourage everyone to share it with your permission, Laura. Thank you so much for coming here and telling our story.
please, that's what it's for. Everyone, please share the film and sign the petition and send that around. And speaking of people power, as Mark was saying, I think it would be really great, even for those of you out there in pajamas, if we really quickly just go on gallery view for a minute and everyone just all together, unmute if you can, or you can just shout it in your room. And let's all say, stop Danskammer. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Stop
Danskammer!
Danskammer!